Last league, I tested almost every single league mechanic pretty extensively, so I'm going to be going over a quick summary of almost every single one, how good I believe them to be, and a quick summary of the pros, cons, and general relevant strategies going around right now. If you've been out of the loop and are not sure what is good, then this video might help you decide what to start farming. I'm going to start with the mechanics that were majorly changed in the new league, some of which had their best farming strategy heavily nerfed or fundamentally changed, and some others possibly being buffed. So I'll just real quickly go over them and say how I believe they will play out in this new league, but I won't be able to give them a rating until I've tested them myself. Last league, in-map blight farming was not in a good state. It was a 4 out of 10 with the main profit coming from oils and using oil extractors on the anointed jewellery you get. This league there have been changes to both multiple Atlas passive points and blight scarabs that has directly removed oil and extractor target farming from blight. On the flip side, it has seemingly added two new endgame farms, one targeting as many blight bosses in lanes to then juice up the chest rewards to absurd amounts, and another where you can salvage your blight towers to gain rewards, with more juiced up rewards for the more variety and higher tier towers you have built. I will personally test both of these out this league and make a video on them, but they can both be either absurd amount of loot, or on the flip side, they could both be significantly worse than the previous strategy. Last league, Harbinger was the single most popular strategy in the game, with one Scarab ruling over the entire mechanic. That Scarab made Harbinger the single biggest gamble of a mechanic in the game, and that Scarab has since been reworked, essentially removing that strategy entirely. The new Scarab now causes Harbingers in area to spawn empowered obelisks, and empowered obelisks to drop currency shards when defeated. However, there is no way to tell how good or bad this may be until I played and tested it myself. My most popular video, which I went super in depth on, was focused on farming tier 17 Conqueror, Elder, Shaper, and Unique maps, and that has been nerfed. The Scarab of Singularity, which it used, which makes bosses drop unique maps, has been removed. And while you weren't making money from those unique maps could convert into other maps like tier 17 slash boss ones. Losing this Scarab makes you lose around 30 to 40% off those maps. However, replacing it with two other map scarabs, since you now have an extra scarab slot, should still make this strategy extremely viable, so I'm still going to give it a 9 out of 10. Breach last league was a pretty good 7 out of 10 mechanic when target farming Chayula Breach Stones. That was the best strategy for Breach that didn't revolve around juicing other farms, and it was consistently good profit throughout all stages of the league due to Chayula Breach Stones always being in demand. The Scarab that targets Chayula Splinters and Breach Stones has been removed, killing what was, in my opinion, the best strategy in the game for Breach. The Breach Craft on the map device now grants one additional Breach for no extra cost though, however that is not enough to make up for the loss of the best Scarab, and Breach is flat out worse this league. And the last mechanic which I would consider nerfed is Expedition. It was a 9 out of 10 mechanic last league, 10 out of 10 in profits with it losing a point for its exceptional difficulty. This league, however, Expedition has had the Scarab that target farms Danig removed. While this is a pretty sizable hit to Expedition, I still imagine Expedition will be profitable in all areas, all league round, just as it always has been. Last but not least for the big changes is ritual farming. It received the most changes this league by far, and I consider them to be almost all buffs, which is crazy because I already had ritual at around an 8 out of 10 last league. It was an extremely consistent strategy with a steady stream of bubblegum currency and the highest ceiling of all mechanics. You could get items worth hundreds of divines and pretty consistently items worth a few divines, and that is still the case. Ritual has received new items in its loot pool, such as corpses that raises spectres, new bases, new uniques, and a fragment to target farm the King of the Mists. Also, seemingly a new ritual strategy has been added, with the Scarab of Recognition being reworked to Ritual Scarab of Wisps. Wisps now grant increased tribute gained to players, while also making it so Ritual alters spawn Wisps. This combined with the buffed Scarab of Wisp should be massive for Ritual. Now on to the unchanged league mechanics. First off, essence farming, very good, both at high investment and low investment. To explain how crazy it can be, Fully juiced essence farming last league consistently made me 100 plus essences per map with the crystal resonance strategy, and I did a video on this which I'll link down below. You can run essences in yellow tier maps, which make certain farms fairly league start friendly, specifically the farms that do not use the Scarab of Calcification, although no matter what, essences can still be quite rippy. They're very easy to liquidate into chaos, which is a big pro for any strategy. However, keep in mind to vendor the essences that aren't worth a lot. Last league, I could vendor the essences that were worth less than 3 chaos in bulk and still make a profit on the essences that I would receive back. However, make your own judgment on what's worth selling and what's worth vendoring. Overall, I'm going to give it a rating of 9 out of 10. It's pretty league start viable, can scale well with good investment, not too hard to run as long as you're not playing a pure mapping build and you go down to yellow tier maps, and it's very easy to liquidate. Some things to note are Beast and Alva do not work with the Scarab of Calcification. I and many others believed that Beast did, but they do not, and Alva used to, but that got changed. The map modifier percent increased number of rare monsters does impact the amount of natural rare monsters in your map, which will make you gain more from the Scarab of Calcification. And finally, if you run essences on the volcano map, the boss is a totem which cannot attack you, which means you cannot die if you're running the crystal resonance strategy. Onto Ultimatum, the biggest surprise of Necropolis League. Ultimatum was easily one of the best money making strategies at all points in the league. It had to get a group play nerf in the middle of the league. Every single strategy with Ultimatum is insane, whether it's farming catalysts, inscribed ultimatums, or the Trial Master. You can even farm catalysts and inscribed ultimatums with the Trial Master, although that's incredibly difficult. The downside is it requires a very good build that ticks a lot of immunity boxes, or a cheese build specifically made for farming Ultimatum, and I'd imagine the buy-in for the Scarabs are going to be pretty hefty this league, and Ultimatum without the investment falls off a cliff. Therefore, this is not a beginner friendly strategy, but I'm still going to be giving it a 10 out of 10 rating. While incredibly difficult, the profit and how easily liquidated it is keeps it as one of the best league mechanics in the game right now. An important tip is to make sure you vendor your bad catalysts and your bad inscribed ultimatums for a chance to turn them into higher value ones worth selling. Bossing 2 out of 10, not going in depth on this, it was in a terrible state last league with very few consistently profitable bosses. Do not do this until we know if the loot tables are adjusted and buffed or if fragment drop rates are increased, or you can be the one to find that out. Personally, last league, I did not have fun finding that out. Next up, Harvest. I made two pretty in-depth videos, one comparing the three main harvest strategies and the other running 100 times juiced crop rotations, both of which will be linked in the description below. Overall, Harvest as a strategy is in a pretty good place. It's difficult to run and you will likely need a pretty good build to be able to kill the bosses and mobs. However, it's the single most convenient mechanic in the game when it comes to liquidating, since juice is always at a high demand and will always sell instantly in bulk. Crop rotation, which is an extremely high investment strategy and not at all a league starting strategy, is a lot of fun and with a large enough sample size, consistently great money. Cornucopia scarab farming shouldn't have too high of a cost of barrier to entry, however, consistently fighting harvest bosses feels terrible and you often lose out on value from the scarab when the bosses share the same plot. Memories are decent too, but they're impossible to buy in bulk or buy a bunch at a time, and therefore not a reliable strategy at all. Overall, I'll rate crop rotation an 8 out of 10, and the other methods a 4 out of 10 because of how much more convenient crop rotation is. Delirium, good for pairing with juice strats that combine multiple different mechanics, but on its own, not amazing and probably the least impressive mechanic I'll be going over. Last league, some of the best Delirium orbs got nerfed, putting them in the worst state they've ever been in. However, this league, Simulacrum Splinter Farming has gotten buffed with the changes made to the Simulacrum itself, which should hopefully make the Simulacrum worth more. There are farms such as Tier 17 Cluster Dual Farming, which can make absurd amount of money, but I don't want to base any of these strategies on how much money you can make running tier 17s with the uncertainty of their state and knowing that most people won't be able to even farm them. So disregarding the tier 17 farms, I'm going to give Delirium a 3 out of 10. Legion, everybody's favorite mechanic. There was a lot of doom and gloom over Legion being dead last league, and I league started with it with Lightning Arrow Deadeye. I was pleasantly surprised by how profitable it was. There's a lot of downsides since it's super popular. A lot of the scarabs get eaten up early on, so it's hard to juice even lightly, and a lot of the times you just end up alching going. The upside is it's still super profitable and fun. Well, it's true that certain incubators and stacked decks were nerfed and demand for emblems are at an all-time low. Legion is one of the best ways to farm scarabs in the game early league, which is what the game kind of revolves around nowadays. This then gets impacted by other late league scarab strategies such as tier 17 farming. However, that's not a problem till later on in the league, so Legion should be one of, if not the best Scarab farms early league. It's great for farming uniques early league too, and it stays a pretty consistent moneymaker all league round. I'll give it a 7 out of 10 with it losing points for just how many items you need to pick up and sell, and with the fact it loses a bit of its value as the league progresses. Onto Sanctum, which is easily one of, if not the best moneymakers in the game if you know what you're doing. Sanctum at the high end is probably the hardest moneymaker in the game. You can make hundreds of divines from a single run, juicing with relics, and even without juicing them, you can still consistently make multiple divines for every Sanctum that you run. This is definitely not a beginner or even an intermediate friendly strategy. You need to know what you're doing and you need to be extremely competent at playing the game. It's a 10 out of 10 strategy for experienced players, but a 0 out of 10 for those who aren't. Strongboxes are easily one of the best mechanics in the game. They spew out loot, are extremely profitable on their own, and are even more profitable when combined with the most competitive money making strategies in the game. I've seen one too many videos of people farming a mirror where their main strategy revolved around strongboxes, and the first video that kicked off my channel was a Necropolis specific strongbox strategy that won't work anymore. Always keep an eye on how the league mechanic synergizes with strong boxes, because odds are if there's a scarab that's going to break the league because it works with the league mechanic, it'll be the ambush scarab of containment, which is monstrous treasure. I can't imagine strong boxes ever not being relevant. It would take some pretty major gutting for that to happen, so I'm giving it a 10 out of 10. Beast farming. Another league start viable strategy, as one of the best ways to beast farm is exclusively in white maps, so most builds can easily do it. It is also one of the few strategies that you can pair with other strategies, since it doesn't take too much investment on the Atlas and in Scarabs. One annoying thing about beasts is it feels like you're not getting the full value if you're not doing all the little tidbits like party play, spade accounts, or using a second character slot to kill, but it's still pretty good regardless. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10, with it mainly being brought down in points because of what I just mentioned, and because of how tedious it is to collect and sell. Last but certainly not least, Alva. I made 80 divines worth of temples in 3 hours running her last league, although I'm not going to recommend that video since I believe it was rushed and I didn't do as much research into the strategy as I should have. There's a lot of depth with Alva farming, and I want to make a better video that goes a lot more in depth with all the tips and tricks that I didn't know and failed to point out in my last one. However, fully just Alva realistically takes one Scarab slot, barely any Atlas slots, which means it can be paired with every single farm that exists right now, and with how profitable I know it can be, I see no reason to not give it a 9 out of 10. And that's the video. If you were unsure about what you wanted to farm on League Star or wanted a quick catch up on what's great and what's not, I hope this helped.